Sydney, Australia has a brand spanking new $70 million speedway that is opening for competition very soon. And with excitement building, I thought it would be pretty cool to chat about how our new Fandangle facility came to be. Enter Pete Styles. Not only a speedway competitor, Pete is also an engineer working for New South Wales Transport and was involved in the very early days of bringing the new track to life. In our chat, Pete goes into detail on his involvement, track location, design concepts, layouts, and so much more, which I think only really helps to clear up a lot of people's questions. Before we get into it though, I can see that only a small percentage of the thousands of people watching the Sprint Car Hub videos are not subscribed. Why? Why not just click the button and ring the bell down below? That way you can't possibly miss a video. Maybe you can do it while watching this intro. Pete Styles, thanks for joining me on Sprint Car Hub. It's been a while since we've spoken about the new Eastern Creek Speedway, but we got in contact with each other and I thought it would be great to touch on how this speedway came to be. Now, you're an engineer that works for New South Wales Transport. How and when did you become involved in the new Eastern Creek Speedway?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Toby. I guess the other thing I'll point out, I'm a big volunteer too. So the first thing I tend to do in any situation in Speedway is throw my volunteer hat on. So I'm not speaking as a Transport for New South Wales representative today. I'm actually speaking as Pete Styles, volunteer for the Speedway. But yeah, damn right, I come from major project planning and transport. So I was really aware when you see a project like Metro and you see an announcement like we saw on the 21st of October, 2019 saying we're here and we're going to acquire. The Waldrons really got blindsided by that. I think we all know that as a matter of plain fact that, you know, after 2 years of trying to negotiate a lease, they got a phone call saying, we're taking your site. That's not how you normally would conduct these things. But nonetheless, my very first reaction to hearing that Speedway was going to be taken was to race straight down to the Speedway office, where I found Wade Ornger. Both of us sharing more than a few tears, as I'm sure the rest of the scene and the community was doing too. And I just laid it on the table for him. I said, this is what acquisition looks like. This is what the process we're being told is going to look like. This is the magnitude of this project. I'm not speaking for that project, but don't expect for a second that they haven't done their research and that we'll just be able to say, go away and ignore this. The problem will go away. It is a massive, massive investment in Sydney. They've flagged our site. So let's start, get on the front and let them know that we're not going to move without satisfaction. And if they expect to do it, we expect justification. So consequently, you saw Wade on the news on the 22nd. He absolutely nailed it. Told the community, told the news, told the public what this meant to our sport. And, you know, I'm really glad because often we as a community could get caught shock and just not know how to react to that, especially after losing 10 speedways before.
So you knew pretty early on then that the speedway was going to be acquired?
No one knew until the 21st. So inside of Transport, there was no secret memos or anything like that where I could see. And even after that, I still can't access those files, nor can I, or otherwise get sacked for it. But on the 21st, when I saw that announcement, while some people are going, what does this mean? I knew exactly what it meant. I knew that when they were saying we're going to acquire this property, we didn't have a lease over the site. That was running dry. So I knew exactly what the next 6 months were going to look like and what those negotiations were going to look like. And if you're in the Waldron seat where you've invested lots of money in a venue and you're trying to recoup that over time, it's got to be an absolute slap in the face after trying to negotiate your way into a lease, to renew that lease, to then find out, hey, we're coming for the site. And, you know, Metro had made that decision prior to that point, but certainly I had no awareness of that. I need to be very clear about that. I wouldn't want anyone saying that I did. But once I saw it, I very quickly went straight into the people in the power and in the people of the know of the Speedway to say, take this seriously. This is not just a gentle, we're thinking of having the site. They absolutely intended to take it, whether we liked it or not.
Now, obviously the former leaseholders of Valvoline Raceway, the Waldrons, they were keen on another site, which was also at Eastern Creek. It was titled the Lighthouse Interchange. That looked pretty cool. We got some pictures of that too, but was it just a coincidence that this was up the road from where the track ended up actually being built, or was there a reason that it was at Eastern Creek and in Western Sydney in particular?
Okay, so the first thing that sort of clued that was the minister's response on the radio the very next day saying, you're going to Eastern Creek. He was really quick to say, I've got a master plan that says the Speedway is going to be at Eastern Creek, therefore it needs to go to Sydney Motorsport Park. The problem was at that time there wasn't an identified site for a speedway in that master plan. So at that point, the first thing I did was get involved with a group of people like the Waldrons, and we literally had meetings called by 1st of November. Within 10 days, we had meetings of people gathering that had common knowledge or extra technical knowledge to get together and sort of swing this into gear and put in front of the government where, if we couldn't be at VR, which was our first priority, then what priority number 2 looked like, where would we go? And they really said early days, the government were, you're going to Eastern Creek. Too bad, that's where you're going. So the Lighthouse Interchange site was actually a site, I went out early days and I scoped it, and we ended up with a meeting with Tim Saville and the Waldrons, Adam Brooks, and we sat there and looked at the Lighthouse site and said, this is great. This is perfect for us to act autonomously. It was very much about like for like. And one of the things that certainly the Waldrons promoters and Speedway Australia were trying to support was that it was an autonomous site, completely separate to Sydney Motorsport Park, to get rid of any of those dust issues, to not have to compete for traffic with the neighbours. I don't think people understand how regular a speedway runs or how big it can be. So we were very much autonomous, but also Speedway by the freeway was an undertone from the beginning. So parking it on the corner of the M7 and the M4 would have been really good for a commercial opportunity for a speedway by the freeway to be like for like. So we put this memo together with Tim. I put the bones of it together. Speedway Australia took their branding over the top, and then we thrashed it right through to a final document that I completed, and we put it into government. And within a week, they said, no, you're going into the Eastern Creek Sydney Motorsport Park. So by basically the 14th of November, we knew that all attempts for the Lighthouse Horse interchange site were not going to work. They had a logistics hub already determined for that with an EIS. So there was no chance. It was worth a shot. We tried really hard to get it, but we had to go next to the drag strip at Eastern Creek. But even in the first bits, we didn't actually know where in the precinct we were going to be. So we scoped 3 sites, and that first couple of weeks I was flat out drawing sketches going here or here or here, until eventually government said here next to the drag strip.
Yeah, I've seen some of the layouts that you've sent me of the concepts of where the speedway could go. I even saw one that looked like it was down in Turn 2 at Sydney Motorsport Park. Were you basically working on behalf of the Waldrons or on behalf of Speedway Australia to put these designs together?
Yeah, I was very much volunteering, and it's a risky situation. It shows the amount of passion I've got for myself. I was fully prepared to be turfed out of transport, but I was very careful to go finish my job at transport, go home, volunteer my time in my Speedway community with the Waldrons and Speedway Australia, draw some sketches, pass it through and go, right, guys, put that in front of government. Let's see if we get something on the table that everyone's happy with. Because let's face it, government didn't want us standing in their way. We didn't want a speedway. Once they said, well, too bad, it was like, okay, where are we going to go? We start engines at the new venue, then you can have the old. That was the message from day dot. I very much said, we don't go to the new venue, and until we start at the new venue, you don't get the keys to the old. That was the message from the beginning. When they really said, you have to move, it was a case of, all right, let's try to find the best site that's most workable. And I was volunteering in that capacity.
So on that point, obviously we know what's going to happen with Valvoline Raceway or the site. There's going to be a rail yard there, but for the last couple of years, nothing has actually happened to the site. It's all still there. So is there a reason why, or what is the plan with the site?
It'd be difficult for me to speculate on the Waldrons' position, but certainly at some point the ownership would have changed hands. You would have expected the lease was finished and the government became the owner of that land. In effect, they already were. The Waldrons were holding the lease of Crown land. So at some point, they lost their lease. I don't know what that looked like for them. I can't imagine it was a very kind or gentle situation when they've run out of lease time and they've invested all this money. A lot of people in the community might be confused about that, but it really, each case is always unique to each owner and their investment, their remaining lease, their remaining time on the site. So that's really their prerogative on how that finished. But to see it stalemated like it was, none of us wanted to see that. We all wanted to race right to the last day and then moving to the new venue. But those beyond I certainly never had an influence on that. But sadly, it sat there stalemated, and watching it right away has been tragic for all of us.
So just on the old promoters, they knew that the Valvoline Raceway site was going to be taken over and that there was going to be a new speedway built. But at some point, those promoters pulled out and wanted nothing to do with the new speedway. Was it because of the complications with the site and not getting the site that they wanted, or what was the reasoning of when and why that happened?
I think there was friction early on. Let's put it that way. Early on, there were people at the table. So Speedway Australia, no doubt, came in with track standards. So you had Tim representing Speedway Australia as the general manager, saying if it's going to be a new track, it needs to meet these standards. You had Felicity and Barry looking at it going from a promoter point of view, I need it to represent these aspects. And then you've got Metro saying, well, we need it to be this because our design or our environmental assessment conditions set that. So there were different people at the party, but you also had the Parklands Trust involved. And the Parklands Trust also meant the drag strip and other venues. I know in those early weeks it got really muddy, and certainly there was some really shady conversations happening that were not benefiting the Waldrons as promoters. You could see the frustration for them, wondering who's doing this. It seemed like there was just this big commitment to upgrade, not just build a speedway, but build a bigger scope of work, more towards the drag strip. And I think that at some point in that conversation, I would say that the relationship broke down between the Waldrons and the Metro / Parklands Trust consortium. And they just said, talk to me when you know what you want to do here. I'm not going to muck around. And then at some point, at least negotiation was put in front of them. They always had first right, but that lease was pretty tough. Some of the conditions on that meant that they couldn't act autonomously. So you remember we said like for like with autonomous, that means not having to plan your program with your neighbours, not having the drag strip add extra shows, not having to work out the dust suppression issues. It just got harder and harder and harder as those early layers piled on. And given that you're a promoter that's already sitting in a situation where your venue that you've essentially invested money in and you may be losing that, I could bet that at that point in time, their frustration more than likely boiled over. And if people weren't being upfront and transparent, you can guarantee it's not a healthy conversation to have. I know Speedway Australia were consistent. Tim stayed involved in the conversations in terms of track standards. And those very early sketches that I put forward got given to the designers, and ultimately they went. But Metro actually hired promoters to help them. So my understanding is they consulted Dave Lander to get him involved. And they spoke to John Kelly a lot as well. But that was to fill the gap that the Waldrons didn't have in being able to be there to represent that. So, I can't speak for them. I don't know what situation they were in, but it's fair to say that they were absolutely between a rock and a hard place, copping the community, copping the government, copping the financial loss. I challenge anyone to sit there and throw millions of dollars on the table and be okay with losing that, while somebody's, trying to say, well, let's do it again.
So once the Waldrons dropped out, they were the promoters at the time of Valvoline Raceway, the government leaned on Speedway Australia and their expertise, and David Lander, who was former promoter of not only Valvoline Raceway, but Lismore Speedway. And you're saying also that John Kelly was involved in some of the design.
Yeah, at the time, noting that they had a gap in their knowledge, like they had the designer of the motorplex involved, but they didn't have the smarts behind what it took as a promoter. So once the Waldrons dropped out of the conversation, they would have had to call in experts or other advisors, and that's where I believe Lander and the likes of John Kelly would have been involved early days to give information. But then obviously Joe Public, we're all making submissions through that submissions process. There would have been lots of people putting their hands up. Certainly people like myself. I said, if I can help, let me know. Like I said, I applied to be the PM. I wanted to project manage this. It would have been a really good career step for me to build that project and represent Speedway for it. But at the time, I didn't get that opportunity, largely because it would have been a conflict of interest racing in the scene, connected to the community and managing a project.
So let's go over some of the design concepts and layouts that you came up with. There was the roof that was meant to go over the seating, which would have been great to have some covered seating, and also the look of some two-tiered seating, which I think would have helped add a bit of a stadium feel to it. Can you describe some of the reasoning why that some of these concepts may have not been used?
I'd say part of it was just not aware of what we were trying to do with it. So it was there to try and build atmosphere. It was there to try and improve the sound experience from the commentators, cut the dust uplift, but also to help limit sunlight, which benefits the track. There's a whole bunch of reasons why putting awnings over the crowd doesn't just keep people dry. It helps the venue operate better. But I don't think they understood that in the early sketches, what benefit that could provide. So some would have just hit delete. There were things that did come in. So if you take, for example, the Rhyolite track on the infield for the solos, that got built to the inside curb. The sheds in the pits, each one of those was dedicated in size to be SGB capable, but also sprint car team capable, so it could be multi-use. Things like that stayed, but the awnings was probably the number one thing that I saw that I thought, geez, there's a missed opportunity there. It would have been so good to have covered awnings retractable over the front main straight.
So obviously there were a fair few people involved with the design and layout of the Speedway that have a lot of Speedway experience, but was there ever any thought or consideration of contacting other people who have been promoters or have Speedway experience to also get their opinions and thoughts on the facility?
I think that was probably a passion area for the community, but I don't think Metro took advantage of that. I think that early on, I was fortunate enough to give these sketches to Speedway Australia. I don't know if anybody else did, but certainly once they got going, they just left it to the design team in Metro, and it was very much in-house. So none of us really got to see the design info. And even when the EIS came out, it was light on with design info. I remember all the confusion all over those artist renderings, which are just artist renderings. But the early days, we were all keen to get involved, but there were only certain people that got that level of access. But nonetheless, Metro had a designer on board by that time that did the Motorplex, and they progressed in a certain direction. But geez, it would have been nice to have stayed involved in this project. There's a lot of value I still had to add based on those early sketches and early thought processes. I would have loved to have worked with those guys that did get involved, but I'm glad at least they had the smarts to call people like Lander and the Kellys. If the Waldrons weren't there, we needed somebody to talk from a promoter's point of view. Otherwise, we could end up with a speedway that looks like a railway station.
So from the outset of the project, it looked like it was going to cost $40 million. I remember going out to the site with Speedway Australia people there back in September of 2020, so a year and a half ago, and they were saying it was going to cost $40 million. There's the letterhead that you've sent me that I've had a look at and has been put on social media that it looked like it was going to cost $40 million. Was it a surprise to you that it's kind of gone over budget? Because now it looks like it's well over $70 million.
I'm not surprised it went over. I do this professionally, so I know exactly why projects like this go over without having to manage the books. But early days, we set a budget of $40 million. And we thought $40 million was going to be more than enough for a speedway on that particular site with this kind of facility and kind of quality. That said, it's a tight market right now. Everyone in the construction industry is absolutely flat out, so you're going to pay a premium for that. But there's a good third of the budget, I would say $20 to $30 million worth of car park in the motorsport complex itself on the drags end, all the way down. So there was a lot of upgrades added. It wasn't just a speedway. It was a speedway plus 2 other parks. But then the other side of it, if you see the construction crews getting smashed with this record rainfall, watching them try to build the project, seeing their approach to it. I mean, they've not built speedways before. You're going to get inexperience. You're going to get sort of overlap. Rail guys building speedways, it's very easy to assume it's just dirt, but it's actually more than that. And I think those who've run a speedway, those who've built a speedway, they know what it takes to get it right. And when you're building state-of-the-art speedway, there's lots of opportunities to trip yourself over in just your construction sequence and then go, whoops, we just blew some money there. Utilities or other bits and pieces, they have custom tanks for water on the infield. Those things wouldn't have come cheap. And although they offer sustainability, they're add-ons, they're tack-ons that weren't part of the original $40 million speedway concept.
So obviously you're not surprised with the budget going well over, but one thing that I remember when speaking with Tim Saville, who was the general manager of Speedway Australia at the time of the track actually being designed, was him saying that the last 2 speedways that were built in the Southern Hemisphere took 8 and 9 months, I think it was, respectively, to be built. This track was meant to start being built, I think, in early January 2021. And then it was meant to finish in September of last year, so taking about 9 months to build, but it's now gone 5 months over. You weren't surprised at the budget going over. Were you surprised to see that the time frame also went over?
You can see even the approach from the beginning. There are elements in there where the approach to building certain parts of it, if you've not built a speedway before, then where would you start? And you could see some aspects of things were slowed down by COVID. Delivery of some items was just stupid. So you can't get this, but you can get this. You can't get staff. You got people on, off. You got to overlay the COVID and the rain. So there've been 2 sort of artificial things that really held up that project. I mean, we're talking record rainfall here over the entire summer that stopped a full race season. We've yet to have an official round yet in our club purely because of rain. and track availability. But yeah, add COVID to that, it couldn't have been easy to manage, but there were road projects out there that had crew A and crew B to make sure that if anyone had COVID outbreak in crew A, crew B could keep going. I didn't see that at Metro, so I think that there was probably some decisions on how they managed that site that ultimately pained those guys while they were trying to build it.
So I've been following this project fairly closely from the announcement that there would be a new speedway, and the speedway has had, obviously an environmental impact statement on the site. We've had a request for proposals document. Everything surrounding the speedway has been quite professional, I guess, as you'd expect from the government. But one thing that I was really surprised with was the lack of communication with the public. Were you surprised with that, or what was the deal with that? Because from as far as I know, the promoters, once they were announced as it being their track to run, they didn't really get a fair chance, because I think they were quite held back with what they could say and what they could do.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at it early on when there's design processes happening early on, you've got certain people getting involved, they're putting the documents together, they're forming it up. There's lots of speculation in the community because no one really knows what's going on. Even Metro is still formulating that. Then you announce it, you do an EIS. While you're planning the EIS and signing off, all those are closed government conversations about, yep, we're signing it up. Yep, we've agreed to the budget. Yep, we're ticking that off. And then you go to tender, and they're not going to be involving the community in the tender process. So again, it's closed book. Then they go to tender on the promoter. And I mean, there's no way that the current promoters, John, Kathy, Kelly, and Scott, were going to be able to say, oh, we're involved in this bid. Like you can't do that. So there was lots of closed book time where the community just had no information. And it would have been really good to have a media liaison feeding us that information. And thankfully, Dennis got involved early, you got involved, others got involved to try to bring the story forward. But once the Kelly did get the keys and start to get involved, you could see information starting to come to light. But even they're standing there, I'm sure they're at track today, if not tomorrow, saying, hey guys, is this finished? Are we ready? How are we looking? Imagine being a promoter that hasn't been given the keys yet. And, they're expecting keys handed over for a house. If that house isn't finished, are you going to take the keys, or are you going to say, sorry guys, finish the house, then give me the keys?
Yeah, I just find it crazy that the promoters have been somewhat restricted in promoting and doing their job, just because of the way the government's gone about it. But it was meant to be finished in September. That's 5 months ago. We've had some practice, which is that's 10 weeks ago now, in December. Weather permitting, we'll have some running very soon. I'm sure it'll be a great facility. I know, just like me, you can't wait to be out there. But thank you very much for joining me, Pete. And hopefully it's a massive success once it opens.
I have no doubt it will be, Toby. I really thank you for the opportunity to talk. And I think, if I could say anything, I think from when they do take the keys, and if that's this weekend, I think you'll see the ownership, the messaging, the communication will change, because it's not the Kellys coming through the government and vetting messages. It'll be them talking to us as a community, as a promoter. So, look, I encourage everyone to get behind this speedway. If we didn't fight for it, if we didn't get together as a community, we wouldn't have one. This weekend, we get to start a new story for a new venue. It's not the showground. It's not Westmead. It's got a lot of lessons from the history of all of the speedways before it, but this is a new beast, and I can't wait to put my car on the track this Saturday and hopefully get something done with it. We're all banking to win this weekend. Who doesn't want to be the first person on the podium at Eastern Creek? Bring that on.